there is still more power in that good Gulf gasoline.
Hello and welcome to today's Daily Blitz. A few weeks ago we made a video in which Boaz here claimed that
There's more power in that good Gulf gasoline.
And since then, Boaz, you've pretty much been proven right.
Yeah, so on Wednesday, Saudi Aramco finally listed on the Tadawul Stock Exchange in Saudi Arabia and had a roaring IPO, really. It was a very strong, sort of a classic IPO where the share really took off as soon as it was listed, which is interesting because this year has been a very poor year for IPOs all around. As we've mentioned in previous videos, all of these Silicon Valley tech IPOs that have taken place this year have really bombed ever since they went public, probably because initial public offerings have kind of become final public offerings for private investors to really just cash out. But Saudi Aramco was one of these IPOs which I thought I was actually bullish on, purely because Saudi Aramco actually makes money. Unlike a lot of Silicon Valley companies which just simply take investors' money and burn it. They all have negative cash flow, or an awful lot of them seem to anyway. Whereas Saudi Aramco can pull oil out of the ground cheaper than anyone else and makes huge revenues for the Saudi Arabian government.
And the timing was the most interesting part as well, because somebody graced the cover of Time magazine.
Yes, it was quite ironic, because on Wednesday was the same day that Greta Thunberg was announced to be the Person of the Year for Time and get on the front cover. And she has become the youngest person ever to be on the front cover of Time, for that matter. So there's a very strong contrast there between the Saudi Aramco IPO, the king of oil, finally going public, at the same time as Greta Thunberg managed to be crowned as the youngest person ever on Time. Now, interestingly, I think this marks quite a strong divide, really, between revenues in the oil industry and rhetoric when it comes to climate change. And it's interesting to see how this is going to play out over the longer term, as those who are very, very anti-fossil fuels get ever larger voices and ever louder voices, while companies like Saudi Aramco continue to make huge amounts of money. Now, I was very bullish on Saudi Aramco, above all of the other IPOs this year, simply because Saudi Aramco manages to make all of this profit and it aims to pay it out as dividends. And in a world of falling interest rates and as a result falling yields, those dividends are really very valuable indeed. And I thought it was really quite an obvious buy. However, a lot of journalists did not feel the same way, which led to some very interesting front pages on the Bloomberg website, which you can see in front of you at the moment. And so interestingly, a lot of journalists were thinking that Saudi Aramco was not going to be a success. It was going to be a failure like all of the other IPOs this year. However, so far, it has managed to do very well. So Saudi Aramco is now worth about 2 Amazons, or about 4.5 JP Morgans, and more than 125 Deutsche Banks, which are, as a result is obviously very, very big indeed.
So as I see this, the conflict isn't between people who are in favor of sort of green energy and renewables and people who are in favor of rip and reap, pollute and burn it all up. It's more between cash flow businesses that doing really well, providing yield, providing dividends, and companies that are basically built on virtue signaling or a vision that might come true at some point.
Yes, though it is very important to note that when you have climate change activists and Extinction Rebellion types getting very, very highly promoted by the press, it's interesting to see what is going to happen in the investment world. For recently, the Swiss National Bank has begun, Swiss lawmakers at least, have begun petitioning to allow the Swiss National Bank, to force the Swiss National Bank to divest all of its investments in fossil fuel companies or anything deemed to be anti-climate. So the Swiss National Bank is really the real forerunner for central bank intervention. It really paves the way and goes to places which other central banks don't do, in that it prints money to buy foreign shares. So it was really quite interesting how they were quite happy to print money simply to buy large stakes in American companies like Apple. Even though that has absolutely nothing to do with the Swiss economy whatsoever. It was purely done under the auspices of a currency intervention, but instead of printing their money to buy another currency, they decided to print their money and just to buy other companies with it. Now the Swiss National Bank is being lobbied to divest all of its interest in fossil fuel companies. And if that happens, I think that's a real lead indicator for what central banks around the world are going to begin doing in moving ever more strongly towards a green policy. And that will have results for investors, including investors in Saudi Aramco.
So the battle between green energy and resources and cash flow will continue. And that sums up today's Daily Blitz. Thanks for watching.